Now turning to some other news, at least 16 people have been killed and hundreds injured in Kenyan anti-government protests. Demonstrators are disillusioned by economic stagnation, corruption and high taxes. And they're also angry about the killing of a 31-year-old blogger while in police custody earlier this month. The government has described the protests as terrorism disguised as dissent.
Heartbreak for these Kenyan families as another body is brought to the morgue. Winfred Mwangi's husband was killed in the protests, leaving her to raise two young children alone.
I don't know what to say. What I want to say, I want justice for him because he was my everything.
He and more than a dozen others were killed when peaceful protests turned violent on the streets of Nairobi and more than 20 other counties. The business district was the epicentre of the destruction. The protests were organised to mark 1 year since anti-tax demonstrations, where dozens were killed. But the government doesn't see the latest gatherings that way.
It was terrorism disguised as dissent. There was no peaceful demonstration. It was riots, chaos, and anarchy.
Instead, President Ruto's embattled government dug its heels in.
This is nothing to do with protests. This is nothing to do with freedom of expression. It was an unconstitutional attempt to change the regime of this republic. Yesterday, what the police did to foil was they were able to foil an attempted coup.
Rights group Vocal Africa, which is supporting affected families, said at least 4 people had been brought to the morgue with gunshot wounds.
We believe that the police could have handled themselves with restraint. It wasn't necessary to kill so many Kenyans across the country. And this is the problem we find ourselves in. You come out to protest police killings and they kill even more.
The UN said it was deeply concerned by the deaths and reiterated that under human rights law, lethal force should only be used by law enforcement when strictly necessary.
And I'm very pleased to now welcome Donald Deya, the CEO of the Pan-African Lawyers Union and a human rights activist. So thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us on DW. To start us off, I just want to put to you what the government has been saying about this. They're describing these protests as a coup and terrorism. Do you see any evidence for that?
There is absolutely no evidence for that. What we have on the streets of Nairobi and several other big towns and cities across the country, we have 3 sets of actors on the street. Protesters who are predominantly peaceful. The police, some of whom are doing their work, and others are doing a range of unlawful acts. And a few goons who are hired by the political class itself, and there's proof of that, and who the police either assist or condone. So the protesters are within the law exercising their civic rights, and it's the government that is breaking the law.
Now, looking beyond just those, those who are out making trouble, when you look at these protests in the bigger picture, how big of a threat do they pose to the government?
First, I reiterate, the citizens are within the law. But 2, the level of discontent with the corruption, with the conspicuous consumption, with the breaking of the law, with the high cost of food is so high. And the citizens, both those who go on the street and those who protest digitally or even quietly in their homes, there are so many that it could actually bring down the government, as happened to Bangladesh last year, or has happened to several Northern African countries 13 years ago. So yes, it is enough to bring down the government.
And I ask you this because I wanted to just get a sense of whether the way the government is seeing this is in line with the reality on the ground, or do they seem to have a perception that the protesters are more dangerous than they actually are?
I think actors in government are confused. I think government is behaving in a helter-skelter manner. At points, they seem to see how serious the threat is, and they seem to want to ameliorate with the public. Other parts of government think they can beat and bludgeon their way out of this, under deploying the police, the intelligence, and other unnamed armed but actors in civilian clothing, to think that if they abduct some of the people, kill some of the people, arrest and arraign some of the people, that they might break the back of the protests. So it seems there's a mixed reaction from government. Sometimes they seem to evaluate the threat correctly, and other times they don't.
Now, what do you make of these recent developments? Perhaps you've seen this video going around that appears to show Kenya's Interior Minister encouraging police to shoot at protesters.
Yes, I saw the video. The minister, who is himself a lawyer and a former teacher of law, is clearly speaking illegalities. The orders that he's giving are unlawful. Last year, upon an application in court from the Law Society of Kenya, the courts ruled clearly that command responsibility can be exercised in Kenya. And if police on the ground or other security actors commit unlawful acts, and you can trace where the orders came from, those who gave the orders can be held liable. And I'm certain this will eventually come to him.
Yeah, so you are optimistic that there will be legal repercussions for fatal shootings by police officers?
There certainly will be legal action. The citizens have demanded very, very assertively that the relevant governmental institutions and independent institutions that should ensure legality by the security actors should act, and should act swiftly. We have an independent policing oversight authority. We have within the police an internal accountability mechanism. We have an independent director of public prosecutions who can order investigations, put together, file, and prosecute. So they are demanding that these institutions should act and be seen to act. But the citizens are also not taking this lying down.
I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it just there because we are just pushing up on the end of the show. But I want to thank you so much, Donald Deya, for taking the time to speak with us. That's the lawyer and human rights activist, Donald Deya, joining us.